Chad sat in his car, distraught and crying harder than he ever had. Head on the steering wheel after hearing the news his wife Barb had a sudden brain aneurysm at work. He had just came out from the hospital and sat in the parking lot for over an hour handling calls from family members and friends. After he had finished the last call, he started his way home, but the one question in his mind kept repeating, how am I gonna tell Bobby, his 7-year-old daughter, he wouldn't be able to do it alone? Calling his sister-in-law, Tina, to meet him outside the house, and with no hesitation, she agreed, and shortly after they met at the corner of Chad's home street. He gets out of the car, leaving it parked around the corner, along with Tina's. The two hug tightly, sobbing, taking a few minutes to collect themselves and figure out how they would break the news. The few minutes turned to an hour, which exceeded 2 hours. Night has come, and Chad starts to build up his composure, readying himself to do the almost impossible task he had ever come across. As he started to walk up the pathway with Tina beside him, hand on his shoulder, and they could see Bobby walking around in the house playing with her dog. Chad walks in, and Bobby comes running and hugging him tightly, and still unaware of the news of her mother. He smiles, hiding his pain, as she goes to hug Aunt Tina. Then she goes on to play, and Tina whispers in Chad's ear, "You sure you can do this?" Chad nods his head, holding back tears and wails of grief. "Don't really have a choice," she has to know, he whispers back, taking his time while sitting with Tina and the babysitter that sat with Bobby. A silence fills the entire house as Bobby is upstairs, brushing her teeth, getting ready for bed. Suddenly, she comes running down the stairs and yells, "Mommy is home from work." Chad chokes on his own water and runs to Bobby. "Honey, what are you talking about?" She smiles and points at the door. "I seen Mommy walking up the pathway. She's home!" Chad's eyes start to fill with tears of sadness while looking at his daughter baby. "I got something to tell you. Mommy had," looking down, breaking eye contact with Bobby, when suddenly there is a shadow walking by the window. Chad looks to his right and can see a silhouette on the stone porch making its way to the door. His heart skips a beat and his blood runs cold. Tina and the babysitter standing behind them, witnessing the same thing, all speechless as Bobby smiles, looking towards the door. "Honey, that can't be Mommy cause Mommy is..." The door handle starts to jiggle lightly as Chad gasps, wiping away his tears, seeing the door is locked, hands shaking as he stands and turns towards the door, holding his daughter back slightly behind him. Tina and the babysitter watch in horror at what they are witnessing before them. The handle shakes once more, and 3 slow, heavy knocks start to rumble the door, followed by the door handle shaking once more. Chad slowly makes his way towards the door. "Daddy, aren't you gonna let her in?" Chad quickly presses his back against the door. He carefully peeks over the door's upper window and can see his wife's distinctive dyed blonde hair. Her hair has always needed a touch-up cause her roots always showed, and that distinctive feature was how he was able to know his supposedly deceased wife was the one behind the door. Gasping in his fear as he looks at Tina and the babysitter shaking their heads in fear, knowing what Chad is thinking. "It can't be her, Chad. Don't do it." Bobby then pushes her dad to the side. "Fine, I'll open it." Chad stumbles, shaken from his fear and grief, and is easily pushed by a child. He quickly lunges and picks up Bobby Nuu, holding her as he quickly spins away from the door's direction. "I unlocked it. Daddy, look!" The door handle turns, and the door is slowly pushed open from the outside, making a creaking, uneasy sound. Tina and the babysitter run away to the back of the house as Chad closes his eyes tightly, hearing his daughter laugh in his arms. "Hi, Mommy." Chad lets out a whimper, keeping his eyes closed, still holding his daughter, and hears his wife's slow, cold, shaking voice. "I'm home, baby." We lived in this house that our father had bought on a deal that he and my mother couldn't pass up on. It was a 3-story house with a full wide basement and a garage the size of half the house, plenty of room for my sister and brother to play, and also a driveway big enough for my basketball. Net where I would play with the friend I made in the neighborhood. There would be times they would call my house the killer's house or murder house. I heard all the stories, and so did the rest of my family, but we never been into that whole thing since we were all grown as atheist ghosts, and all those kind of things never scared or bother us after a year of not seeing or hearing anything happen in that house. What was there to be afraid of? One night, as we all sat down at the living room eating our dinner while watching TV, everything seemed to be pretty normal. We laughed horseplay on the couches while our parents sat with their devices in their hands, watching us jump on one another, and my father would jump in and toss my younger siblings on the couch, and just by one loud, sudden crash that came from the master bedroom, the laughter stopped just like that. We all looked at each other in silence as my father slowly got up and nudged his head towards me, grabbed the bat as he grabbed an iron fire poker, telling my siblings and mother to stay downstairs while we went to inspect what was happening. As we approached the bottom of the stairs, we heard another crashing sound, followed by a loud scream coming from a male's voice. My heart stopped as my father just seemed to grow furious, thinking it might have been a robber who climbed the side of the house and crept into the window looking for something to steal. More sounds of things being thrown across the bedroom hitting the wall, along with a grunting and an almost painful gasp. We climbed the stairs, ready to swing our weapons at any moment at whoever was in our house. When we got to the top of the stairs, my father in front, he looks at me and nods his head while mouthing the words on 3. 1, 2, 3. We charged into the bedroom expecting to find a burglar, but all we found was smashed picture frames and my mom's collectible antique shelf. We walked around the shattered glass, peeking into the bathroom and behind the curtains, but nothing was found. My dad looks at me and shrugs his shoulders while I poked my bat around the floor, pushing glass aside, and then it happened again. But this time, from the living room where my mother and siblings were, we hear their screaming while the sound of glass smashing is heard throughout the entire house. My dad and I ran down the stairs as quick as we could while at the ready to swing at the intruder, but no one was there to be seen. We find my mother holding the kids huddled in the dining room corner as my dad and I look to see the TV smashed and the glass coffee table smashed outward, like something literally went under the table and smashed it, which was weird. "Who was it? Who was in here?" my dad asking my mother, who's shaking vigorously with a pale look on her face, not saying a word. Seeing the look of anger on my dad's face was something else. He wanted to catch who was doing this, but I started to think to myself that maybe this person or thing couldn't be caught. I look at my dad and his anger turns to confusion as he turns to look at me. I knew at that moment we both thought the same thought of what was really happening here. I turned to look at my younger brother, who was just crying harder than he ever has, while my little sister was calm as still waters. I kneel down, trying to calm my brother down as I see my sister's hand raise up slowly. I turn to look and see her pointing at the far corner of the living room, and I whisper, "What? What is it?" I stand up, grabbing my bat, and see my dad scratching the back of head, looking confused. I see just over his shoulder and look toward the corner between the window and where the TV was, and I gasp. Not a normal gasp, but, well, it felt like the breath was taken right out of my lungs when I seen it. I nudge my dad's leg with my bat, and he turns towards me. What is it?" And I point my bat toward the corner of the living room. He looks over his shoulder, and by then, it was visible to all of us. A tall man standing in the corner of the room like a shadow. Its entire body reached from the floor to nearly the top of the ceiling, giving off a dark shade of shadow. My dad drops the fire poker and quickly grabs my siblings and mother and pushes them towards the front door, which was just around the corner where they stood. I try and catch my breath as I see this shadow figure swiftly dart across the room and makes a sort of a loud sighing sound. My dad grabs me by the shirt and pulls me toward the door, but just as we were about to run outside to safety, this thing lets out a loud exhale of breath and grabs my brother by the wrist. I could see his hand lifting and soft of being pulled as I see his feet on the floor being dragged toward this shadow as he resisted while screaming at the top of his lungs. I quickly use my whole body weight and soft of tackle my brother under his arm as my dad pulls open the door with all his strength, and we manage to run outside to the driveway. My brother crying so hard he can't catch his breath, while my father and mother holding my siblings trying to comprehend what had just happened. I stood up and looked through the living room window and see this shadow, tall shadow, darting from room to room as it screams and smashes what picture frames that hang on the wall. I turn toward my family as this thing suddenly stops at the window and looks at us. I look back and could barely see it, but the dark, shaded outline of it is still visible. My sister steps beside me and holds my hand, still calm as ever, eerily calmer than she should be. She looks up at me with no expression at all and tugs on my hand. "Tim hates us." My uncle was always the goofy type of guy, would always play tricks on me and my siblings. He would hang out and always would jump at the opportunity to babysit me and my younger brothers. We would put the mattresses on the floor and do wrestling moves on each other while watching it on the TV. As soon as a commercial would come on them, we would go rowdy when it would come back on. We would all stop to watch. Those were real fun times. To me, we were a little more rougher. We'd hard punch each other in the shoulder, seeing we'd up first, kind of like a game of chicken, sometimes just a nudge to greet each other. One night after a babysitting night with him, he went on home and I went to my room to play on my laptop. I had my headphones on listening to music. I was so focused on my game, and that's when I seen Up lean in the door and nudge me on the door and nudge me on the shoulder. I laughed and took my headphones off and see him walk out of sight and down the hall. I thought you left already. "Did you forget something?" I hollered, and a few seconds pass and my mom comes around the corner. "Did you say something?" I stopped for a second and winched my face. "What's Uncle Vaughn still doing here? Thought he left?" She looks at me weird. "What are you talking about?" "He left a little while ago. Vaughn is dead. They found his car flipped over on the side of the road. That was the sheriff and need me down the road." I looked at him and my mom thinking they were pulling some kind of sick prank. "You're kidding." "I just seen him. He nudged me and went down the hall." My parents looked at me like I was crazy. "This isn't a joke. I'm going right now." My dad takes off in a hurry along with my mom, who decided to drive since Dad was in a state of shock. I swear I seen him and felt him, seen his signature smirk as he turned away and was gone like some kind of magician. Sometimes I sit here and think back at that time and think of it as a way of him saying goodbye, saying it's gonna be all right. I at times don't know... be all right. I at times don't know if I should be scared of at ease that he's in a better place now. I dreamt of red rivers never ending, fresh and pulsing. Along the banks, scarlet roses bloomed. It was the most beautiful dream. A procession of deer danced as they made their way to the stream for a drink. Deer don't dance. These creatures were something else. Holes revealing ribs as flesh falls off the bones. No fear in their sunken eyes. They were already dead. I woke up screaming by the very river I was dreaming about. It was not running bloody. It was in a camp with my family. We were just sitting out by the campfire under the stars. So how did I end up here? Why was it so quiet? The campground looked like a horror movie. I had never seen so much blood. I followed the trail screaming, "Mom, Dad, oh yeah, Olivia!" So silent, and it wasn't long till I figured out why. Guts decorated the lawn chair like a pile of grotesque streamers. From the back of the chair, dangling by shreds of flesh, was my sister's head, and her jaw looked as if it were torn off. I cried, "Olivia, Olivia, no!" I sobbed at the foot of the lawn chair. I couldn't hold my sister's body. Even her fingers seemed chewed off and were littering the ground. Her face fixed in an expression of terror and misbelief. What animal could have done this? Is it still around? I had to see if anyone else was alive. I didn't have to look too far. On the clothesline was my mother. Bits and pieces of what was left of her hanging like meat to dry. Honey eyes gouged out and on the ground along with her tongue. If I could have puked, I most certainly would have. No animal did this. I couldn't find my phone amongst the carnage, nor was it in my pockets. I had to find it here or run for help. But what about Dad? I can't leave without Dad. I can't leave without Dad. My thoughts cut short at the sight of a soaking crimson tent collapsed. And so I crept forward. "Dad, Dad, please be alive." Only the dead heard my sorrow when I lifted what remained of the tent. I saw a mauled man covered in so many savage bites, and chucks ripped out, exposing muscle and bone. This is what is left of my family, just pieces. Next to what was left of my sister, I spotted her phone trembling. It had been left open to the camera function. I simply couldn't believe it. This was nightmare fuel. Some bipedal creature bigger than a wolf with its appearance came up from the river with mad yellow eyes. The fangs were dripping in saliva. The inhuman speed, it went after my parents before murdering Olivia before she could run. She only had time to blink. They never had a hope in hell against this beast. But I was getting water by the river. How was I not killed? I should have been with everyone else. Why didn't this animal eat the food laying around? Why did I feel full? We hadn't eaten dinner that evening. This feeling made my skin crawl, and then I tasted it. Fresh blood and gore in my own mouth. I pulled their flesh from my teeth and knew I was forever damned